Hey everybody, this is Kevin Pennell, host of the Hope is Not a Plane podcast. This week I am sharing or resharing an episode from November 2018, my 10th ever podcast. And it is a little bit late, but the Battle of Gettysburg took place July 1st through 3rd, 1863, and was a pivotal moment in not only the Civil War, but this nation's history. I learned a lot about it on my own reading, but in particular, I was fortunate to take part in what's called a staff ride, where you go to the battlefield, the national park. You learn from the leaders that made decisions there. And in this episode, I highlight how these leaders and their techniques are modernized today. We use them. They're spoken about by other folks. And here's my 2 cents. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope it helps you both in your personal and professional life. Lead teams well, lead yourself well, help with communication, decision-making processes, a whole bunch of good things in here. So thanks for coming to the Hope is Not a Plan podcast. Please visit hopeisnotaplan.org for more. And now, welcome to the Hope is Not a Plane podcast, where we address tough questions head on, face our problems, and highlight our hopes by providing actionable planning steps to improve ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. Now, let's get logged in and get locked on to this episode of the Hope is Not a Plane podcast. For today, there's a topic that I've presented. It's called Leadership Lessons from Gettysburg and Beyond. And so it's a presentation I've done based on knowledge that I gained and then put some of that together through a course called Leadership is Action, which is an L-580 course put on by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. So that's where all the all-hazard incident management practitioners out there, that's our legacy. We came from the wildland world. They came from the military. But this course, I was fortunate that my leaders on my incident management team asked me to participate. It's for influential, I'll say, and kind of folks that are in leadership or doing good things on their incident management teams should be engaged in this course. What we were able to do is go to Gettysburg National Battlefield and kind of armchair quarterback, but more learn from some key leaders that took place in this battle, which is just, when you look at the logistics, the geography, the circumstance, the times in the 1860s during the Civil War, is just overwhelming. And our great opportunity was that we had mentors for this course that were type 1 or national level incident commanders. So a lot of big world experience, one from CAL FIRE. And then we had retired non-commissioned U.S. Marine Corps non-commissioned officers and retired commissioned officers of various worlds, one a scout sniper and recon, cavalry. So a broad kind of breadth of the Marine Corps, but in large, what we had was high-level incident management and high-level military leadership. And as I've talked about, as other podcasts that talk about leadership, particularly Jocko Willink, Ryan Mickler, Behind the Shield, some other stuff, leadership is just good leadership, and you can use that in all these different fields. So what I was able to do in this course is go to the site for 3 days. We went around, we had some pre-work, and I'll touch on those resources in a second, but really take good notes and think, you know what, I got to come here. Let me take good notes. Let me put together what I think my teammates could learn from. And I would recommend that to anybody. If you get to go to a conference or a course or a class or certification, is now you've been empowered with knowledge that you need to give other people. So that's what I did. I took pretty good notes, broke bread with people after hours, all that kind of stuff. When I got back, I put all my notes together, and then down the road said, you know what, I think this is knowledge that I could share with other people. So I was fortunate to share this with some up-and-coming public safety leaders at a public safety leadership academy that one of my friends and colleagues put together in the area that I live in, and also shared at a state-level emergency management conference, and then with my alma mater, the Homeland Security program at Virginia Commonwealth University. And it's really neat because, again, I'm especially going back to my university, I'm way older, I'm 44, than the students that are in there, but it's not just a historical battle course. I mean, I'm not a historian. I did my homework. I have a good idea of what happened at the battle, but it's more in these super difficult times, how did these leaders make choices or not make choices? Or, how do they mitigate risk or accept it? And so there's a lot of concepts in this course and in these concepts and in how I put them together that you'll hear across other leadership forums, books, podcasts, because again, good leadership transcends kind of the environment that it's used in, I say, which means if you're a good leader somewhere, you can be a good leader somewhere else and not have to be the subject matter expert in every little piece of that organization, because you're just going to build a team of really good people that do have the technical expertise, that do have, strength in an area that maybe you don't. That doesn't mean that if you're an information technology like I am, that it doesn't hurt as a project manager for me to have a technology background. It definitely does. You can kind of call BS when things are happening, or at least know enough to keep you in the game, in the discussion, so to speak. But I don't have to know how to program code. That's not my thing. I'm going to ask my coders, how much time does it take you to do that? And let me try and get you the time and the space and the resources, etc. So how I kind of structure the program and how I'm going to do this via podcast, because usually it's a stand-up with some slides, and I'm not a read the slide to you kind of person, but it's a good visual reference, is that I covered. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and the why, how, what golden circle model. So I kind of start with that, and I'll get into that in a second. But I'm going to circle back to the resources that we were given and the pre-work we needed to do for this course. And I would recommend these whether you get to do a staff ride, the L-580 course, or not. If you're a leader in any capacity, which again we all are, but in public safety or the private sector or incident management teams, whatever you're doing, there's a book called The Killer Angels by 𝒔𝒂𝒂𝒅𝒏𝒔. And so he also wrote Gods and Generals and The Last Full Measure. It's the book that the movie Gettysburg, that really long, I think it was a TV miniseries, and it was a full movie. It's outstanding. Great actors in it. Great mustaches, I keep saying. I can't grow a good mustache. My dad's had one forever. But in that movie, you just get, just some top shelf actors. And the movie is very much like this Killer Angels book, and the book reads very well. So we had to read this before we went there because, one, it's your obligation as a leader to be informed, right? So when you show up at the battlefield, if you're trying to understand leadership lessons and you keep asking questions about what you should have done your homework on, now you're hamstringing everybody else. So read The Killer Angels, get it. I think I got this paperback for $10. You can get it from your library, etc. But it's a great book, and it's a lot of the basis for the knowledge that will be helpful if you go to Gettysburg and you can kind of know what happened at the battle or have a really good idea. And then if you've seen the movie Gettysburg, it's very similar to that. The other book we were given, the great resource that I still have, is Leading in the Wild and Fire Service. It's a publication that the National Wildfire Coordinating Group put together. This one's from 2007, so I went on that staff ride in about 2012, 2013, I think, so it was a few years now. But it's an outstanding leadership manual, and again, it's primarily, for bringing up the wild and fire folks, but we're super connected. There's not an equivalent that I'm aware of for all hazards yet, or if there's not, maybe that's something collectively out there we could think about. But just looking at the contents in the preface, it's a framework for leadership, duty, accomplishing the mission, respect, taking care of people, integrity, developing yourself, and then eyes forward. So it's a great resource. And again, something pre-work wise and a reference that we had during the course and then afterwards to know, as you move up, particularly in an incident management team, we've gone from base level training to the week-long boot camp to okay, now you're going to be on a team, is when you show up somewhere, when you go to help somebody, you're going to have to be able to lead people you don't know, that you don't necessarily or at all have any authority over, that you need to lead by your example, by your inspiration, by your competence. And so this Leading in the Wild and Fire Service is a great resource for that, for whether you're in incident management or not. I mean, you could read The Killer Angels and you could read Leading in the Wild and Fire Service, and it'll make you a better project manager for computer projects, for IT projects. I know it's helped me. Again, I talk about the same core skill set of being able to talk to people and get an org chart and objectives and resources. It doesn't matter whether you're in a field trying to find the missing person or you're in a conference room trying to get buy-in from your stakeholders. It's the same skill set. So Killer Angels and Leading in the Wild and Fire Service. I think you can reach out to the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. If you're on an incident management team, I'm sure you or your leadership can get a hold of these manuals. It's a great thing for the teams. The other resource we got was a customized kind of manual put together by leadership committee from the staff rides, from NWCG, or National Wildfire Coordinating Group, from the National Interagency Fire Center. And this resource is really the course manual, so you have to be enrolled in the course to get this. But it's got, which is outstanding, it's got each of our team logos. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, San Diego Fire, Central Virginia All Hazard Incident Management Team, which I was on, Eastern Area Coordinating Center, and the FDNY. So it's your course, customized course manual that you use to walk through, and it's a workbook where you can take notes and everything. So those are the resources, kind of how I got to take the course, and now I'm gonna get into that golden circle bit of why I think this is important, this information I'm gonna share, these decisions. For me, the why is really summarized in a quote from James Mattis, Secretary of Defense. He was General Mattis, retired from the Marine Corps, where he was talking about, someone asked him about why he reads so much. And he said, "We've been fighting on this planet for 5,000 years, and we should take advantage of their experience. Winging it," in quotes, "and filling body bags as we sort out what works reminds us of the moral dictates of the cost of incompetence in our profession." So Mattis was a Marine Corps general. He's a Secretary of Defense now, so his business was war and he was good at it, right? But think about, let's say we don't do those lessons learned for a project, or after a big fire, or even a small fire, or after the suspect pursuit, or whatever, for the public safety folks and for the private sector folks. If we don't take time and we're not honest with each other, the why of us sharing knowledge and learning and getting better is just critical. And if we don't do that, we're going to keep making the same mistakes. And so what he alludes to is we can ignore what we learned from in the past, but we're gonna kill people, or to translate that to business, we're going to waste money, we're going to waste time, people are going to lose jobs. And that's a huge impetus for me of sharing this and sharing, putting together people working together for active threat or active shooter response, for being effective in incident management, because it will save lives. It has saved lives, and it's really important. So how we're going to do this, the next kind of ring in the circle, is we're going to basically do an after action discussion. So I'm going to provide some brief historical information about the Battle of Gettysburg, some of these key leaders that we'll talk about, some of the examples they had, some that were good, some that were not. And it's all, shaped around that. And we'll be pretty honest, pretty open dialogue. And so we can work not to fail as, personal and professional leaders. And then what are we going to do? Visually, we would normally look at battle maps, and here's where the people are. I'll describe to you where battles took place and directions and what people were doing, but try and provide an understanding of how we can provide this as an emergency manager, a project manager, an incident management professional, a line firefighter, EMT, or police officer. Because again, you don't have to be wearing a bunch of brass at the back of the SUV to be able to apply these leadership techniques. They are universal, and anybody can do that. So why Gettysburg? Why did we end up there? How did this battle take place? So let's set the time. Let's look at kind of time, scope, and cost. So I'm going to call out the project management piece of me here. So the time for this battle, for the main part of the battle, there was a lot of stuff leading up to it, going up and down the coast, or up the coast, I guess I would say East Coast and Mid-Atlantic, is July 1st, 1863 to July 3rd, 1863. So not a crazy long time, but when you look at the numbers of people, thousands, tens of thousands, both hurt, injured, killed, and more that were involved in the battle, it's a pretty overwhelming thing to think about. And again, if you see Gettysburg, you'll just understand how massive and how critical this battle was. And the war kept going after this, which we'll get into a little bit, for a few more years. And this wasn't even the bloodiest battle. Just amazing. So the scope, what's the scope of this battle? Battles among geography all around Gettysburg. And the cost, this is from Teachers First website about Gettysburg, so kind of some costs. So it's kind of estimated at $7.5 million, which is based on 1863 estimate of like 2.5 per day times 3 days, right? So money, a little different back then. But if we were to make this a project, think of this in terms of time. This was a 3-day project that involved the geography of Gettysburg and cost about $7.5 million. So that's a pretty significant project. And for them, it was in lives and land taken or not taken. So it begins, we're west of the town. If you can picture right in the middle of a piece of paper, Gettysburg, the town of Gettysburg's there. Just look to the left, essentially, on Mumminsburg Road. So there's Union folks under General Buford, his cavalry, that are riding around, and they spot some infantry folks from the Confederates coming in from the west. And they ended up at Gettysburg really by chance because there were good road systems there. So the first person we're going to talk about is Major General John Buford. So this is day one, July 1st, 1863, and he's the commander of the 1st Division of the Cavalry Corps. And so these are horseback troops for cavalry. That's what that means in that day and age. Cavalry these days is in armored vehicles, personnel carriers, tanks, etc. And so Major General Buford's the one that discovers this Confederate force coming in from the west and realizes we need to stop A.P. Hill. So A.P. Hill is the Confederate leader that's over the forces coming in, and we need to stop him and hold the high ground. For folks that have seen the movie Gettysburg, this is Sam Elliott's character. Again, great mustache. Sam Elliott's got probably the coolest voice ever. So he actually emphasizes, we'll hold the high ground, in his super cool Sam Elliott voice that I can't do. So our focus here as students in the course, and then as for us listening to this and thinking about ourselves as leaders, is Buford's ability to make decisions under pressure and to empower his people. So why do I say that? So Buford realized, I have all these folks, a much smaller force, on horseback, and there's all these infantry. Infantry means people on foot with rifles, right? And there's more of them than me. My people sitting on horses is probably not a great, or rather for them would be a great target. So we're going to have to change our tactics, and we're going to get off our horses, right? I'm going to send some runners to go get more help on horseback. If they run into somebody, come back and tell me. I'm summarizing, and this is all, again, in both the book and the movie and history. So Buford says, you know what? We got to hold them here. We got to hold till we can get more forces so they don't take the town, so they don't take this whole area. And so he has his people adjust, and then he empowers his folks to go say, hey, go get a help. Let me know kind of what you need. I'm gonna back up here and keep an eye out on the battleground. And so what Buford shows here is his adaptability, right? And there's a saying, and I have friends that are Marines, and I put some boo-boo Band-Aids on a few Marines when I was a corpsman, is every Marine is a rifleman. So for Buford, all of his people, right, are going to fall back to, they still have their rifles, whether it's, the musket, the carbine, their handguns, but we need to get off our horses, get entrenched, and hold. And so they do that, and they hold pretty well, not forever. They get bumped back a little bit eventually, but he's adaptable. He realizes, I can't stick with the same tactics the whole time. And so public safety wise, think about, are you adapting to today's threats using rescue task forces? Are you using walking teams? Mike Snar and I talked about this, where you're going to put a couple EMTs and maybe a law enforcement officer together just at an event, just to walk around, take a look at folks. Are you going to realize in your project that maybe you can't just do the same change control process you've been doing because you either have a critical time constraint that came up, or it's just not going to work out for your project, and you can't hold just to hold for the fact that you have, a change control on a certain day of the week. So just think about being adaptable there. Delegation, he delegates to his people, here's what we need, go get help, go ask for help, go let me know. He doesn't tell them exactly what road to go down. He doesn't tell them how to ride their horse or how to get into the weeds. He empowers them to go do what they need to do and then come back to him and report what they need. And then he's communicating constantly, right? So communication needs have been around forever. He does some face-to-face, which is really back then one of the only options, right? You send a person with a message. I'm sure they used, pigeons or something else, but they didn't have cell phones like now. They weren't texting each other. They didn't have WebEx and other things like that. So he says, here's the message I'm telling you right now. You tell this message to someone and tell them what we're doing here and get us help. We need more resources. And so it's usually the people that screw up communications, right? We get the message wrong. We don't talk to each other. Bad communication from not realizing, hey, there's someone bleeding out. We walked by back and forth and they bled out. From not just getting up out of your cubicle and going around the corner and say, hey, here's what I meant by that email, or don't even send the email. Just go have that talk with them. So uncoordinated ventilation with hose teams, right? Think about that from the fire service. So someone's inside, I bust open these windows, feed that fire with oxygen, boom. That's a big problem because we didn't communicate. So what Buford really helped us realize is that we shouldn't be defined by a set process and be stuck in it. We need to empower our people, and communication is a timeless skill. So this is, again, day 1, July 1st, 1863. Buford's got that holding action to the west of Gettysburg. And, there is an opportunity now, because he can't hold forever, for the Confederate force is starting to push him back, even with some reinforcements that he gets. And then Buford's leader is killed, Reynolds. He's killed right there on the battlefield. So their leadership's starting to take a hit, and you realize, we got to pull back, and they do eventually. So they get pushed back through the town eventually. He can't hold them forever. And who they're pushed back by and who had an opportunity there was Lieutenant General Richard Ewell. So this is the same day, a bit later. And what Ewell is faced with is this concept of the time wedge, right? So the time wedge meaning the more time that ticks along, the less options you have. So if you think of, the kind of triangle to the right, the left is open, where the options are going down toward a point and the time's going toward the bottom. If you are waiting and waiting and waiting and you're not making some kind of decision, by the time you get to the end of that wedge, your options for making a decision are gone, or they're just horrible options. So if you can't make a decision, if you're not, okay, yep, I see this opportunity, I see the opportunity to move ahead, to exploit, hey, we can get these resources cheaper, or hey, we can take this ground, then you also have to consider both the practical, what are you losing, and then how does that build trust as a leader, right? If your project team's looking at you and you're locked up and you can't make a decision on, yes, I approve that testing process, or on the fire ground, people are looking at you and you freeze up because you can't tell them what tactics to use. That's something we have to get past. And so for Ewell, he didn't press an attack where he had an opportunity to take some pretty significant ground in pushing toward Culp's Hill, which is a high ground, which would have given him and the Confederates a big advantage, which honestly some folks look at as, did he lose the battle for him, right? Because now they pushed the smaller force through the town, and now we're going kind of south and southeast and west of the town of Gettysburg, into those which most people have heard of, Little and Big Round Top, and there's Culp's Hill and some other key geographic areas. But so Ewell didn't press the attack when he could have, and he wasn't paying attention to that time wedge. Time's ticking. In the meanwhile, the Union's pulling back, and they're getting entrenched in the better high ground. Now he's got an uphill battle. So that's a problem. He was advised by a junior officer and some other folks, and ordered by Lee to do so, to push through. But the problem, there's a few problems. One, from some statements that Ewell made, which really some folks have heard of or maybe even heard, that whole, if I wanted your opinion, I'd give it to you. In his case, it was if I wanted the opinion of a junior officer, I would ask for it. Well, that's a problem, because those are the folks out on the line. Those are the folks that have the tempo of your station, your precinct, your project team. If you're not listening to the pulse of what's going on out there, and you're not taking the advice of the smarter people on your team that you've brought in to help you be successful, not just you, but your team and the organization be successful, then that's a problem. And Ewell had that problem. He didn't want to hear from a junior officer trying to tell him, this lieutenant general, what he was going to do. And so he did not check his ego. He let time work against him, and he dismissed his subordinates. So those are his examples of what he did or didn't do. Leadership lessons for all of us is there's a difference between confidence and ego, right? I can be a very confident person and listen to what you say and say, yep, I hear what you're saying. However, maybe in this circumstance, that might not be the best option. I've seen this outcome happen when we tried that. Let's keep that in our pocket so we can use it again down the road. And so you're still being confident because maybe an outcome, you've gone through a scenario more than somebody else, and so you're confident about it. But you're not just saying, "I don't want to hear from you because I didn't ask you." That's just a crappy thing to do. Time is life and money is how I equate that. So when I wear my incident public safety hat, from what I used to do, time literally is life, right? In emergencies, basic life support measures can support a large part of injuries that happen out there, as long as we get someone to a medical facility where they can get surgery, where they can really fix the issue and get them in surgery and then, get them to healing, versus I'm going to stay here forever and try all this super advanced stuff. Now, advanced life support has its place, absolutely. But look at some models. Boston EMS is largely basic life support because they understand I'm going to get this person to the hospital where they fix the problem as faster than if we stay here and mess around. You've heard the term stay and play, right? So that's a very tactical consideration. Think about too for projects, right? As we keep going and we pay all these experts that are doing all this high level coding or consulting or vendors, that costs extra money, where we need to look at, are we optimizing our resource schedules? Are we optimizing the timeline of this project so that we're making the best decisions proactively in a good amount of time, and we're not going to end up spending a whole bunch of money because we drag this out? So kind of very tactical versus strategic looking projects and decisions there. And, you'll dismiss as subordinates. So for us these days, build a team of people smarter than you. I'm not the first person by any means to say that or understand it. But to me, that's one thing that Ewell failed at, is he had people that certainly had areas smarter than him, right? That knew the pulse, that knew ground truth. They were telling him, we can do this, we can push them back and take the high ground. And he didn't want to hear it. Every day I go to work, every day I was on the incident management team and public safety. If someone smarter than me knew or knows, hey, the sequence of that programming is not going to work, Kevin, because of this, this, and this, who am I, just because of my ego, to say, no, I'm the project manager, here's what we're going to do? That's dumb. It's egotistical, and it's not the right thing to do. So listen to your experts. That there's a reason that they are in their positions, that you asked for them, that you have them as resources on your project team, that you have your technical experts in like hazardous materials, or when I talked about building the program, how do we put a good program together to train folks in responding for anything really, but for that active shooter, is we go, oh, hey, SWAT commander that's done this for a long time. What should we do? Where should we go and not go? How should we coordinate together? And then collectively, we all work together. It's not rocket science. Again, just like communication, it's usually us that screws it up. It's usually us that screws up our teams too. So, and I love this saying from Extreme Ownership, from Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, there's no bad teams, there's only bad leaders. That doesn't take away ownership from each of the team members. But the first people we should look at, if our team is not doing well, if our project's not doing well, if our response is not doing well, is what am I doing or not doing to keep driving us toward success? And so just keep that going in your head. Evaluate your situation. What am I doing? Am I communicating well? Did I not share this information? Am I trying to make decisions for people that should be making it for us on the team? Whole host of things to determine there, but just always get your own tempo of how you're doing as a leader. The next area we're going to look at, we're going to go south of the town. So if you happen to have a reference, hopefully if you're driving you don't. But Gettysburg, if it's the square in the piece of paper, go south. And we're going to run into that chain I mentioned, little round top, big round top. And this area called the fish hook. So it's literally the rocks shaped like a fish hook. And the Union has people from, say the fish hook's upside down. So the loop of the hook you'd tie in the line is at the bottom, and the hook goes up around to the right. So imagine that fish hook is all kind of rocky outcrop areas, right? So the Union line has people all around it facing kind of out to the left into the open fields, back up at the top curve of the hook toward the town of Gettysburg. And so they have a pretty strong line, and behind them, and they're on the high ground. They're in a good spot. So what we're going to talk about now are some disparate actions that took place south of Gettysburg. And the leader we're going to look at that was this example was Major General Dan Sickles. So now we're on day 2, July 2nd, 1863. The Union Army has been able to entrench themselves a little bit more. So that lost opportunity where Ewell didn't push us, didn't push hard enough and take that high ground. Well, the Union Army took advantage of it and said, you know what, let's get up in those rocks. Let's get our logistics in order. Let's get this line along this fish hook, because now they're looking down with their artillery, with their rifles and everything on anything coming at them. It's a pretty good spot and, a horrible situation. So Dan Sickles is the commander of the 3rd Army Corps, and he was next to another leader, Hunt, and they looked at their terrain and they were like, this is pretty good spot, right? We've got, we're kind of up on a hill and there's more hill to our back, and on the hill are our teammates. So that's a good place to be. And so the thing was, their communication wasn't clear either between themselves or with their leadership as far as, do we just stay here? Do we just hold? Should we move? Do we have, some, are we able to kind of make our own decisions and go where we think so? And so the guidance was, hold the line at all costs, right? If you've seen war movies or you are, knowledgeable in battle, or you just understand, if you break a line that's holding something back, whether it's sandbags holding back water or guns pointed out at bad guys, you make a hole. Now people can come in and get after it. And so that's a problem. So Sickles decided, well, I think I can move, because me and Hunt just had this interaction where Hunt was like, well, I don't think we should move, and I'm not really going to speak for leadership to give you permission to. So General Sickles took that as, yep, I can do what I want. So this is where we get into that freelancing term, which is, a kind of popular term used both in the military and some public safety, where folks just do whatever they want. It's different than, I'm making a good decision that I know is going to help. I'm just going to do what I want, and I'm going to interpret it through kind of my bias, so to speak. So what's important here is the concept of clear communication, both to your subordinates, from your subordinates, among your peers. And so in that day and age, again, they're yelling at each other. They're in the middle of battle. They're talking. They're like, their leadership's not right next to them anyway. So there's a couple acronyms I'm going to talk about. And again, if you've studied leadership at all and been in those circles and read some of the books by Jocko Willink and some of the other concepts by other leadership for the military, you will have heard these before. The first one is Sickles not really truly using the CUDC. So what that stands for is to communicate first by receiving the information. To understand the message by developing your situational awareness. So he didn't really receive the information clearly. He didn't have good situational awareness to understand, if I move my troops out, which he did, one, we're going to get hammered, and then someone's going to have to come help us, which they had to do. So his situational awareness and understanding the message of, I need to hold this line and stay tight with my people, was pretty well lost. And then decide. And so he did make a decision, and no decision is a decision. It's just the decision he made was not a good one, and it didn't help his team. And then the last thing we need to do is communicate that to our team. So he actually did the last two. He made a decision. He said, we're moving out. I like that rocky outcrop over there, or that place in the field. And then he said, hey, everyone, let's go out. And they did, not realizing, oh my, now we're out here by ourselves. And Hunt understood that, because he even made a comment that said, well, we're going to have to go get him anyway. And they did. And they lost people they may not have had to. Would he have stayed tight in the line? So as a leader, we have to understand what's going on. We have to make a plan, share the plan, and then act on that plan. And this is the concept most folks have probably heard of as the OODA loop, right? It was developed by a Korean fighter pilot, where he was successful in air-to-air combat, and he realized, hey, there's this process I'm doing, and it's the observe, orient, decide, and act process. So I'm going to observe what's going on around me. I'm going to orient myself to what's happening. I'm going to decide on which way I'm going to go, and then I'm going to act on it. And so for him, that was a concept that he brought back, which is great, which Dave Burke from Echelon Front covers. He was a fighter pilot, Top Gun guy, but the OODA loop's been around for a little bit. Since Korean War, so since the 50s, and in leadership and public safety circles. But it's a great concept to think about. Okay, let's see what's happening in our environment. Let's orient ourselves and think about it, not even in a kind of high-speed tactical way, but walking into a meeting. Who's in the room? Let me orient myself to the tempo of the room. How are people talking? Is everybody just sitting there on their phones or their laptops, or is everybody paying attention to each other? I'm going to decide, how do I want to start the meeting? Like, do I want to just be serious, get into it, do intros, crack a joke, then I'm going to act on it, right? So that's not tactical at all. That's just reading day-to-day stuff in a room as a project manager, but it applies as well for any other scenario. Strategic versus tactical leadership. So General Sickles had a good handle on his tactical decisions from the standpoint of he was with his people right there on the ground, literally shoes on the ground, I guess, leather and wooden shoes and a wool suit in the summer must have been horrible, but he was there on the ground, so he had great tactical vantage point, and he moved his folks out, so they listened to him there. But his strategic view, which is if you've heard the 30,000 feet view, when you're a high level leader, you need to be able to see way up here so you can see more of the earth than I'm just right here amongst the trees. And there's value in all those different levels, but he kind of got lost, I think, in that tactical look and looking for better ground instead of going, wait a minute, I'm part of this fish hook that if one part of it breaks, now I've opened the floodgates for the Confederates to get through the line. And so Sickles and his men had to be rescued by other Union forces that, of course, they couldn't afford, but they had to send resources. So imagine, your project starts falling behind because of decisions you made or you didn't understand the message, and now we have to put more money into it and give you more people to help bail you out. That's a similar kind of thing where your decisions we all make can affect people well beyond just us. So takeaways from Sickles: we all need to practice that active listening. We need to work a process together. So I talked about the communicate, understand, decide, and communicate, or the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act. In the incident management world, that's working the planning P. In the project management world, that could be waterfall or agile, Scrum, Six Sigma, some kind of process, but we all need to work something jointly is the key there, and communicate well. And if you're a leader, even a ground level leader, you still have to be kind of strategic in being able to see the whole picture, but particularly a major general or a project manager, or a battalion chief, you have to see everything. You have to stay up high and not get sucked into the fact that you really like doing the tactic stuff, because you're going to be less helpful to your team than if you stay kind of up high and make sure they get what they need, have the resources that we're meeting the objectives that we set together. That's a critical thing there. And so that was a big challenge for Sickles. He kind of did what he wanted to do and lost sight of the strategic objective and how negatively he was going to affect his people. So again, picture that square in the center of the piece of paper is Gettysburg. We go straight down a little bit, create an upside down fish hook with the hooks to the right, the loop is to the left. So near that loop is Little Round Top. And this is still day 2, July 2nd, 1863. We're going to talk about Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, who has some great examples of just some outstanding leadership here. And it made a huge difference in this engagement for sure. So he was told pretty clearly, you read it in the book, you'll see it in the movie, you are it. You're the far left, you're the flank. That's it. You can't go anywhere. If you fail, this line crumbles and we're done. They were on the high ground, which is good, but they're low on ammo. People are getting hurt. It's day 2. Just of this engagement with thousands and thousands of people. And so Chamberlain is the commander of the 20th Maine, and he held Little Round Top on the 2nd. So the focus really is he had outstanding communication and had great situational awareness, and he adapted to the diminishing conditions and overcame a lot of diversity. And so Chamberlain held, and we'll get into and how he contingency planned for that, which is pretty awesome because it fits the model exactly that I'll go over in a second. But he held until he had people he had to spread out because they were injured, and then he held and got ammunition from the wounded, and then fixed bayonets, and then rushed, and then he went through every kind of plan he could think of, and he used backup plans, and he always considered and then what. So as a medical unit leader on the incident management team, one of the great things I was taught from one of my instructors, and then I always thought about when I was with the team, was and then what. So fortunately, we weren't really in remote areas as much as my wildland counterparts are. So if I was a medical unit leader or say a corpsman medic in the field or doing wilderness medicine, so what you have to figure out is how can I create an emergency medical system in the middle of nowhere. And one of the examples was a young, I think 18 or 19-year-old wildland firefighter and a tree fell on his leg and he broke his femur, which creates a lot of bleeding. And they could stem the bleeding some, but it was not a well-coordinated system that had been set up by the medical unit. And he bled out there and he died because they couldn't figure out the transportation. And a lot of that should be done ahead of time. So Chamberlain conversed of that in his situation on Little Round Top, holding the left flank, which is a hilly, rocky, nasty-looking place. He did consider, and then what? Okay, if they come in this wave, we're going to have to, get that ammo and we're going to have to do things. And he improvised by spreading his people out because he ended up having less people as they got more and more injured and getting ammo from the wounded and the dead. And then he was, and I'm going to use direct from Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's Extreme Ownership and their concepts, he was default aggressive, absolutely. For him, literally aggressive in combat, but also how that translates to leaders, we'll talk about in a second, but he wasn't waiting for someone to make a decision for him. He wasn't waiting for leadership to solve the problem for him. He knew I was given orders and I know the importance and I have a good read on if I fold, if we fail, then we're going to lose this battle. And this was a huge battle. I mean, all the big leaders are at this battle. Plus, so think about that from, as I say that, from the perspective of being, at a steering committee meeting, if you're a project manager, all the big leaders are there. And you can't fail that opportunity. And it's not as high speed as getting shot at on a hill in Gettysburg. But say you're launching a project that's a multi-year, multi-million dollars, you need to be kind of default aggressive in presenting success, right? Here's the objectives we put together that you believe in your heart are solid. Here's the schedule we believe is going to be successful. Here's the team we put together in an org chart that is together, not three different teams because we have different vendors or, I'm a huge believer in one org chart. We'll just make it fit and kind of there's some nuance in how you do that. But so kind of back to Joshua Chamberlain. So he was default aggressive knowing I got to solve these problems. And the technique that it really fits is called pace planning. So in pace planning, you have a primary plan, you have an alternate plan, you have a contingency plan, and an emergency plan. So your primary is the sun is out, it's a beautiful day, I'm fully funded, we have all the resources we need, everything's going like we think it should, and it just is great. Your alternate is you're 75% funded, you have 3/4 of the resources, and you're a little bit off schedule, right? So you're still doing okay, but it's not what you really wanted to go with. Your contingency is you just lost even more of your people. You're working through money. You're just pushing it and pushing it. And again, I'm using kind of a project management model. And then your emergency planning is a hurricane took out the facility you were going to build or it messed up the site, right? So you have to have plans and be forward thinking that, and then what? And then put it in the kind of structure of let's have that primary, that alternate, that contingency, that emergency plan. And back to the medical unit kind of model is you can game that stuff out, right? And when you do training, particularly, it's a great example in tactical combat casualty care. So let me give you an ideal scenario and then we start making it worse and worse and worse, right? Or, you're funded at this. Okay, now you're funded at this. And actually, when you write a lot of grants, in fact, with emergency management, that's actually some scenarios you have to consider because you have to put in those bids to say, okay, if you give me all of it, I can do this. If you give me half of the money, I can do this. And so that's just a good planning process for the grant world as well. And be thinking that, and then what? And picture your, cascading scenarios. So anticipate both those good and bad outcomes and try and, get to that proactive stance, not just reactive in decision making. Chamberlain certainly was proactive in staying ahead of the next rush that they were getting from the Confederates. You can do that when you're working in a project. You can pre-align resources. You can make stronger relationships. So when you get to that contingency plan where things are starting to go south, you work better together with your partners and work through solutions a little more smoothly so that, God forbid you hit that emergency plan where someone's hurt or funding is completely gone or the facility is destroyed, that it's not as big of a deal from the standpoint of how you're dealing with your team and everybody else versus, just dealing with the practical matter of, okay, how do we get a new facility or we've already worked out that we're going to have two law enforcement and two EMTs or medics together. So when our guy gets hit by a brick from protesters, we know we're going to be right there, scoop him up, get him in a medic unit, get him to the hospital. It's not a cluster when you're trying to do it on the fly, and now your guy's down and it's a problem. So Chamberlain, again, there's a leader, and there were many, but he seemed to be the one that stood out so much as far as someone that just got it, that just understood we have to do everything we can to make this successful. And fortunately for him, it did work, and they held off the Confederates. And great portrayal of this, at least from a movie sense, in the movie Gettysburg. Certainly wouldn't be appropriate to have leadership lessons from Gettysburg without talking about Pickett, Major General George Pickett from Virginia, the famous Pickett's Charge, which when you've gone there, so I went there and I jogged around the battlefield and actually jogged across. I was like, I want to see what it was like. And I'm in exercise gear, modern stuff, tennis shoes, shorts, sweatshirt or something. Thinking about these folks in wool suits in the summer with hard bottom shoes, carrying all that clanky, super, solid metal and wooden weapons, getting shot at with cannons and rifles. And, for them going across this field, this about a mile of open ground, is just unbelievable. And so Pickett was commanding Longstreet's First Corps, about 5,475 men. And the buildup really is everyone knew, except for Lee, I'll say, and come back to that in a second, General Lee, that this, it can't work. We have to go around. Longstreet almost begged Lee to say, look, let us flank them. Let us hit them on the side. Let's hit hard. They're weak over there. He knew the battle's going on. And Lee said, no, I believe we're going to win. We're going to go. And so there was a lot of, from my 2 cents and some of the perspective I was given when I did this course, and if you read the books and look at things, there's a lot of ego and a lot of mystique from who General Lee was at the time that led him to just not, again, listen to his folks who really advised against ordering Pickett and his men to run across an open field toward fire from, a higher point at a super high volume. And, some examples from Pickett is he followed orders. Sometimes the answer is yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. And that's a tough thing as a leader, certainly as a team member. Sometimes as a project manager, you have to push folks and be the one that says, well, I understand it's late, but we have to stay here and get this done today, and there's just no alternative. Sometimes as a leader, you have to make that call, and that's it. Sometimes as a team member, because we all have our leaders higher up the chain, right? That's what's told of us. No, you can't have that vacation day because this deadline is critical. We've already spent $2 million on it, and I know you really want to go to the beach, but we have to do this week. Sometimes that's the answer. And in public safety, in the military, it's even more critical in some instances. But sometimes we just have to do the job, and I think then understanding where we draw the line between kind of the moral order and, what we think is immoral. So is it a moral order either in business or public safety that we're given, or is it just an unpopular one we don't want to do? And sometimes you have to give those rough orders, right? So I can advocate for my people to say, I really don't want to have them work the weekend. They've been working so hard. And then the answer from my leader is, well, they have to, and that's it. And this is what's in the contract. So I'm not going to do the game and say, well, they said that. They told me, right? There's no magic they that makes us do things. It's we know who. It's to say, look, here's what we have to do. We know we have to do it. And then maybe work out an alternative, right? So when can you get them a break after this weekend, or some kind of incentive or reward, or, in addition to doing a good job and those kind of things. So just think about if you have to be the messenger of giving rough orders like General Pickett had to do to his men that must have been looking across that field going, oh my God, we're going to die. And most of them did. 600 killed, 1,220 wounded, over 1,000 missing. I mean, that's devastating, and that's, in a short amount of time. But to his credit, Pickett gave the orders, and Pickett's charge is in the history books. He gave the feedback up the chain, And again, the answer just came down that, that's what's going to happen. So in public safety and incident management, as leaders, and kind of the example I mentioned in project management, particularly public safety and incident management, sometimes you have to give the order to send people into harm's way. In that active threat, active shooter response, the standing order for law enforcement from everyone I know that's the subject matter experts that's in that field is you go in, right? So it's a known, I'm going to go in and I'm going to stop the bad guy. That's it. It's kind of a standing, professional, I put the badge on kind of thing. Or I'm on a medical call in the worst neighborhood in my city, but I'm going to go in there because that's my job, right? It's the neighborhoods you hear about on the news every night where the shootings are or something else, but they called for help and you're going in. Doesn't mean you're going in blind or without, security and things like that, but it's an accepted risk because of the profession you chose and the commitment and the code that you made. So, are you confident in yourself too to speak up and down the chain? Do you give that feedback up? Do you manage up or lead up? That's a huge thing. And don't shy away from those difficult leadership moments, because that's what makes you a better leader. The butterflies you feel, man, I have to do this. And then it's like when you're a kid and you made a bad decision and you think, oh, I should fib about it. And then you tell the truth and you may still get grounded, but the pressure's gone. Your parents appreciate it, right? It's a way better thing to do than to just stand up to it, accept it, and then give those orders or help your team through those difficult things. And so, two, kind of think about your work environment. Is the tone of where you work such that your boss is open to accepting that, leadership? And if you are that boss, are you open to accepting that leadership? And if not, you got to figure out how to navigate that. And there's, some folks that have talked about that as well, working through kind of difficult work environments. But Pickett, it was devastating, but he followed orders. His leader above him tried to get minds changed. Lee wasn't having it and said do it anyway, and he did. And, that was a tough lesson for Lee to learn afterwards, which Martin Sheen, I think, is who played Lee in the Gettysburg movie, and he portrayed kind of the angst and the just crushing defeat on his face, and in a very real way where you could imagine, I pushed for you all to do this thing and it worked out in a horrible manner, and now it's on me, and oh my God, what did I do? And so he really captured that well. So again, if you are giving those tough orders, just try and get people that, what if scenarios and then what, so you can provide them with answers even if they have to push through those difficult scenarios. So now we're on day 3 of the Battle of Gettysburg, July 3rd, 1863. We're going to talk about Major General George Meade, who's in command of the Union forces there. And Meade's opportunity was to pursue the fleeing Confederate forces after Pickett's charge and a few more engagements. The Confederates were done. They'd waved against the high ground and back, and they were just not doing well. The Unions, at this point, the Union supply chains were way more effective. It was the Union as this industrial-based logistical machine versus the South's, agriculturally based logistical machine. One is seasonal, one is not. And so that certainly came to a head here. And the logistics supply chains for each were just miles and miles long. But so General Meade, commander of the Army of the Potomac, he had some hesitation. Lee was escaping, and he may have been able to end the war. There's other folks that say if he would have, they were going to ambush him, and it would have turned out a disaster. Who knows? Because it didn't happen. And so they're out of Gettysburg now. They're going back up into to the west of Gettysburg and toward Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. And so all these forces are moving. Confederates are moving out. Union's kind of going after them. So with Meade, there was some communication lost between him and the president, President Lincoln. And Lincoln wanting him to pursue and try and stop the war, as everybody of the day, nobody wanted this war to keep continuing with the devastation, but particularly the president wanting Meade to pursue Lee and his forces and try and just crush it and just end the war. So the problem was there wasn't a lot of influence from afar for Meade to say, okay, we really need to do this. I mean, look at what they just went through for 2 days. And the battle and the people they lost, they're all exhausted. And so they pursued a bit, but they didn't follow them all the way. They didn't, attack them and try and, end the war. So there wasn't a lot of influence to say, like, absolutely do it. There also wasn't implicit communication from the president to say, you have to go after them. I want this war over within 2 weeks or whatever precedent. And there was no deconfliction of, well, is that a direct order? Or are you just telling me that if I can do it, I should try, but I'm allowed to look at my people and look at the environment and make that decision for myself? So a lot of ambiguity in what was expected of Meade at the end of this engagement that was so devastating to everybody that, a concept here is, so from President Lincoln, did he have enough influence on Meade to allow him, to say, hey, do what you need to do, but here's the objective I want. So I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I want you to pursue them, and I want this over, like I mentioned, in 2 weeks. And so as a leader, can you set those objectives and kind of stay out of the weeds, but make it clearly understood? Like, here's the outcome I expect of you, and you figure out how to do it. But absolutely, I'm going to implicitly let you know, here's my end state, right? Here's the commander's intent. Here's the strategic business objectives we're going to align this project with, and that's how we're going to operate. And so Meade, I don't think deconflicted information as well as he could have, and didn't receive really implicit information. So if you are that leader, if you're someone on the team, give clear direction, right? Make sure people understand that communicate, understand, decide and communicate. Think about that, right? Listen to the message, understand what it is, say, okay, here's what I'm hearing, and then do something. It is huge. And so make sure everybody knows that too on your team. Does everybody understand, let's say project managers, does everybody really understand the objectives and then what you're going to do and how they're tied together and why the timeline is important? Does everyone understand before you go into a house to take someone down for law enforcement, here's who's going in, here's who's going in what doors, here's when, and here's the timing, and working through those. On a cardiac arrest and EMS, do people know their part on the team that's working the arrest? Who's going to do compressions? When we're going to switch out? Talk it through. And when in doubt, it's okay to say, I don't know. And in fact, it's encouraged. If you don't know something, if you don't know what you should do, say, you know what? I don't know what that is. Can you please explain it? Or I'm not clear on why we need to do something. Please let me know. And that's just, again, it comes back to communication. It's a simple thing. But it can be so complicated at times, it seems. So whether, again, Meade's pursuit would have actually ended the war then, and we know that it didn't end. It was another at least year or 2 years after that, which is amazing to consider, again, the scale of the Battle of Gettysburg and kind of some summary stuff. So it's looked at as a Union victory. There were 165,000, a little over that, engaged with 51,000 casualties, and that's killed, wounded, people that left. They just, kind of took off. And that's just unbelievable. So of those, there was a little over 90,000 Union, 70,000 Confederate. Not a huge disparity on the casualties, a little over 23,000 for the Union casualties, a little over 28,000 for the Confederates. The Union was led there by General Meade, who we just talked about, and then General Lee on the Confederate side that we talked about. So just an unbelievable picture into our country, right? That time in our country, but as a leadership class, as lessons learned, as how we can apply decisions that were or were not made during that battle. It's the battle part itself is just astonishing. And again, I can't recommend enough trying to get involved with doing a staff ride. And there's significant battlefields from out west to now to here, and look at our history. And again, think about that General Mattis quote. Let's not forget our history, whether it's lessons learned from a project or from combat or public safety after actions or anything. We need to look at them. We need to ingrain that and step forward from those lessons learned. The other leader that I want to highlight as part of this kind of leadership lessons wasn't at the Battle of Gettysburg, but certainly a key player in the Civil War, and that was the General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant. So we were introduced or really kind of told as part of this course about Grant, not because of his involvement, so to speak, there, but more of him as a person and a leader. And so there's some stories about Grant and his bravery. I mean, all these folks that fought in the Civil War, the majority of them, and not all, I guess, were combat veterans from the Mexican-American War, other skirmishes. A lot of them were on the same side. And, folks that know the Civil War know the kind of brother against brother or former teammates against teammates. So with Grant, the real focus with him was his ability to control his emotions, right? Which I'm sure no small part had to do with his combat experience. He was also known to whittle wood on a chair as bullets flew by and, look up and kind of just be like, oh, that's cool. A story we heard from one of our mentors was, this is 1860s or 1800s, whenever the story generated. Or back then it was, when you took a picture, you took the cap off and you had to sit still and let the image burn into the tin or the film, whatever the technical term is appropriately for that. But Grant was in this parlor, and so there wasn't quite enough light where he was sitting. And the photographer's assistant went up to adjust the big glass panel that was up on the ceiling, and Grant had just been sitting there, and then he got up around the same time, and as he had moved out of the chair, a giant piece of glass fell and shattered right here where he was sitting. And the story is that Grant just kind of looked at it, brushed the chair off, and sat back down and was like, all right, let's go. As opposed to being completely freaked out from the fact that he almost died from, this giant shard of glass coming down. So he had the ability to be imperturbable, was the new term I learned during this course, meaning he had great control over his emotions. He was slow to excite. And so as leaders in whatever environment, again, in an office, on the street, anywhere in between, in a field and incident management, there are plenty of opportunities. I know I have both failed and succeeded in controlling my emotions, where it's an interaction with someone with a poor attitude, or an outcome is not happening in your project, or you're having a bad day that you're carrying to wherever you're going, where it seems so difficult to control your emotions, where that's both personal and professional self-development to say, hey, this, it could always be worse, or just take a breath, calm down. And so Grant at the highest level had the ability to do that. And we need to control our emotions without being a robot, right? So you still got to relate to people. You still need to get along with them. But you can't be flying off the handle. Leading by your collar device or what's on your shirt sleeve is no good, military or public safety, right? Sometimes you need to use that as an enabler for your people, but it shouldn't be the way that you're leading, and certainly not also with, you're the yelling leader, or you're the one that loses it on the scene or in the boardroom when things aren't going well. It's just, it doesn't instill confidence. In fact, it erodes it. And so Grant had a great ability, and it was a kind of a neat example, I think, both the story and then, him himself. So the other thing was, Grant was not high on the choice list among military leaders and government leaders as far as taking over as the general-in-chief for the Union Army. And Lincoln, though, believed in him, and he stood by him. And so really it's kind of a Lincoln principle, but applies to Grant, and that he stood by his people, and he didn't let politics dictate what happened. So office rumors, so-and-so's like this or that. Yep, they're hard to work with. I don't like them, blah, blah, blah. Right? Form your own opinions. Figure things out for yourself. Do the job. There's certainly politics that happen in the EMS station, the fire station, the precincts, among teams. It's all over the place, right? In emergency and incident management circles, it's all over the place, right? But one thing I try and do, and again, succeeded and failed, had the bias, not had the bias, is not let somebody tell me what I should be thinking or be predisposed to about someone I don't even know or haven't worked with. Just not fair to them. Could be totally inaccurate, and who knows what their interactions were. And so, to his credit, Lincoln still stuck with his person, Grant, put him in the position, and as we know, Grant did pretty well, and then became president. So that worked out pretty good. So that was a great example there. The imperturbability of Grant to hold his emotions was pretty awesome, but he wasn't, a robot. So control those emotions, but allow yourself to kind of let go. Do you network with your project teams? Do you set up some time to kind of decompress with folks in the station? And so just to kind of bring back to the between the slides 5 thing, that the 5 I would say, and I'll represent these with each of the leaders we talked about, not including Grant, is so General John Buford, number one is be adaptable. I think that's the greatest attribute that he showed during this battle. General Ewell is listen to your people. Don't let your ego drive your decisions. Colonel Chamberlain is do that pace planning, so have your primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency plans and get the mission done. He was just great at that. George Pickett, sometimes the answer is yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and then you have to be comfortable to stand up and give those orders and stand by your organization or your team when it's the right time. And for General Meade, make sure you get clarity on communication, right, from leadership and to your folks, but make sure you get the clarity and don't be afraid to say, I don't know. So again, I can't recommend enough. Read the book, The Killer Angels. You can find it pretty much anywhere books are sold, which sounds like a commercial. Watch Gettysburg if you can. It's a great movie. It's long, so I think it's 3 or 4 hours, but it's well worth it. It'll summarize a lot of this information. The book Killer Angels. If you can get to Gettysburg National Battlefield, regardless of where you're listening to this podcast from, I highly advise it. One, it's beautiful country, but then to look at the monuments and do the tour and hear the stories, even if you're not doing a staff ride where you're getting guidance from military leaders and incident management leaders, just that place is pretty hallowed ground, and you'll see what I mean when you're there. Just the scope and scale is unbelievable. So thank you again for listening to kind of my summary of leadership lessons from Gettysburg and beyond. I think these could apply whether you're doing health information technology, incident management, project management, emergency management, etc. Nothing earth-shattering, but I think it's always a good reminder sometimes to hear the basics, right? And a good saying in emergency medical systems is BLS before ALS. Well, that means basic life support before advanced life support. So for each of us individually as leaders, sometimes we need to pull ourselves back to what are the basic things I'm doing well or not well as a leader that are enabling or not enabling my team to succeed, and focus on them, try and improve them, seek help if you don't understand how. So thank you all again for going to the Wayback Machine with me in this episode from 2018. Please follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Hope's Not a Plan. Hope is Not a Plan Facebook page, YouTube channel that's approaching about 440,000 views. I appreciate it. Primarily sharing fitness ideas 15 seconds at a time. This podcast is also there if you want to throw it on the background and then start adding more educational videos. Thank you all so much. Stay safe out there. Study your history. Get those leadership lessons. And I wish you all Godspeed.